Everyone is a star child, made of stardust and the infinite potential of the universe. This extraordinary fearless something in each of us clamors for freedom from the bonds of fear, conformity, and an ordinary life. Welcome to Dr. Durr's Living in the Sweet Spot, where practical tools and solutions from the intersection of mind-body medicine, science, and spiritual well-being awaken and empower you to live out your infinite potential, to live life in the sweet spot. Hi, I am your host, Dr. Valen A. Durr of Dr. Durr's Living in the Sweet Spot. Today, we're going to have part 2 of my discussion with my guests about the protective illusion of the Black Superwoman complex. And in part 1, we set the framework for the origins of that complex, which is African people were brought here against our will as enslaved people in order to satisfy the profit, power, and pleasure of the landed gentry, i.e., wealthy white males. And how, as a coping mechanism, as Dr. Mawusi Arnett talked about, Black women developed what we call the strong Black woman, or the Black Superwoman complex, as a way to cope with that, as a way to be seen as equals in a society that frankly has never accepted us as equals. Also, in that desire to excel in every area of our life, we've also taken care of others at the expense of meeting our own needs and dealing with our own emotional pain. So joining with me again this week to have part 2 of the conversation are my guests, Dr. Bridgette Arnett and Dr. Mawusi Arnett.
Hi, thanks for having us back.
Thank
Well,
you.
hello. I'm so glad you all have been able to join me for this, important conversation, because it's a rich, deep conversation that I think has been enlightening for us as we have the conversation, and we know that it will, awaken and enlighten and inform others who have the the open-mindedness to do so, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So
I agree.
So just as a reminder to the audience of the excellence, the exceptional women that we have on the program today, the Black girl magic in the house, right?
Yes. Hey.
that is represented here today. Let me just remind people of that. So again, we have my guest, Dr. Bridgette Arnett, and she has an MD and a PhD with board certifications in neurology, clinical neurophysiology, and sleep medicine. She has more than 20 years of experience and is the clinical advisor of bitewellness.com, a text message-based wellness learning community for Black women looking to shift habits, cut disease risk, and boost well-being. So, and then
Hello.
there,
Well, thank you for having
yes. So that's Dr. Bridgette Arnett, and then of course as Dr. Mawusi, shared with us again, they're mother-daughter. Dr. Mawusi Arnett being the daughter, but Dr. Mawusi Arnett is an MD and has an MPH, which is a Master's in Public Health from Johns Hopkins, is from her MPH, and her MD is from the University of Pennsylvania. So again, Black excellence. So Dr. Mawusi Arnett is a physician entrepreneur with a background in health disparities, research, and board certifications in both family medicine and obesity medicine. She is the founder and CEO of bitewellness.com, a text message-based wellness learning community for Black women, again, looking to shift habits, cut disease risk, and boost well-being. And then they both co-host a weekly workshop that's a wellness workshop on Wednesdays. And again, in order to help improve the health and wellness of Black women. So again, I want to welcome you both back to the program today, and we can continue this conversation.
Thank you, Dr. Ballin.
Thank you.
It's such
Thank
a
you for having us.
special space to have, really, to have the three of us talking together. So thank you for that.
So yes. So, and again, just also as a reminder for folks, Dr. Bridgette Arnett, also in her brilliance and her excellence, attended Northwestern University undergrad and University of Illinois at Chicago Medical School, again, where she and I both attended during the same period of time. So we're going to jump right in, because where we left off was we were discussing in the context of, despite the fact that we develop this excellence, right, in many areas of our lives, if not all areas of our lives, that somehow we've thought that, one, that would help us be seen as equals, and two, frankly, would keep them from coming after us. And where we left off with part one was essentially talking about the then president of Harvard, which is Claudine Gay, who at that time was the only African-American female to ever be president of Harvard University, and the only African-American to ever be president of Harvard University in its history. And how, she had been, had to appear before a congressional committee who, in its veracity and its attacks in terms of the way it was conducted, because of her comments about, I should say her testimony about the anti-Semitic comments that had been made, and how she had handled or mishandled in their description of it. How subsequently, from the pressure of one of their white male donors, who's also, had attended Harvard, the pressure was so high that she has now subsequently resigned, since we had part one of the conversation. And it was brought on not only by her testimony, but also by the fact that was accused of plagiarism, which Harvard had investigated back in October, found it not to be true. But then subsequently, since the testimony, there was someone else who came out saying that there was all of these, examples of plagiarism. A large number of them, may have been as many as 50 examples that they said. But the problem was they had no proof at all. But because of the pressure, she subsequently resigned. So I wanted to pick things up in part two with that, particularly in light. And again, when we're talking about, excellence, you strive for excellence, and we may think we hope that it brings us to be seen as equals. We hope that it that we will then be accepted in these positions of prestige and power. And yet it doesn't seem to do so.
Yeah. And so I appreciate you laying all that out, because, the last time we talked, we ended on Claudine Gay. And as you said, her job title has changed, right? The saga further evolved to the point where she's no longer Harvard president after just serving a 6-month tenure, and resigned under obvious pressure. But, I think for me, we don't have to spend too much time on this, but for me, she's a touch point in this lesson about the narratives that so many of us tell ourselves. So I'll hit on just a couple of points in her scenario that really resonated with me. So the narrative, as I understand it, okay, uh, October 7th, Hamas attacks Israel. Then Israel attacks Gaza. And there's this ongoing war, bloodshed, um, and college campuses, universities are just uh, proverbially blowing up all around the country, right? There are there's activism on both sides. Student groups are really working to get their views out and to advocate for um, the side that they think needs advocating for. And so there was a lot of fracturing of student bodies all around the country. In the midst of this, um, a Republican led committee in Congress embarked on an investigation into the anti Semitic comments that were made, or the handling of anti Semitic comments made at a number of universities across the country. And really, there was some question as to which comments are defined as anti Semitic and which are pro Palestinian, but not necessarily anti Israeli. And that's like a whole other political discussion I won't get into. But it's in this context that the congressional hearing happened, right? So, like, and how we're handling it on universities, and what do we do about free speech, right? And then somehow, because her answers were not to the liking of powerful folks, both in Congress and specifically donors to Harvard, there was this full scale attack on Claudine Gay and Liz McGill of UPenn, who pretty summarily resigned. And on the other woman president in the trio, a president of MIT. And so there was this full scale media attack on them that sought to discredit them. And so the way that Claudine Gay was discredited is through these allegations of plagiarism. And what's really interesting is that Harvard investigated her. So as this was unfolding in November or so, and early December, Claudine Gay says, hey, I mean, if there are some areas in my papers, and anyone who has written a long research article or written, submitted a published article to be submitted an article to a journal to be published, it is hard to keep track of citations. But she said, look, if I improperly cited some sources, then I would love to know. I'd love to correct it. I would love to give credit to the academics whose work I benefited from. So, Harvard, please do an investigation. They concluded their investigation and said, hey, we found some improper citations, but nothing that nothing that rises to the level of misconduct and not what we'd call plagiarism. So her boss looked into her work and said, we're not too concerned about this. We're going to go back and fix the citations and move on. And yet, there were these people, there were these outside forces who were still determined to make her suffer. They thought she should be punished. And I think it's no coincidence that they came after this Black woman in a historical position of power with such vehemence. Definitely more than coincidence, certainly much implicit bias present, and likely some just explicit racism fueled the subsequent attack on Claudine Gay. So when my boss says I'm good And my boss has promoted me consistently throughout my 15-year tenure or so at this institution. And they think I'm awesome. How on earth do these external forces get to tell lies, play up these plagiarism allegations that my boss has just said don't rise to the level of plagiarism, to the point where I have to leave my job because you are making it so hard for me and my boss? Okay, that was a very long description, but I just wanted to highlight that point in particular because one of the reasons it resonated with me is that going back to this superwoman schema, that back to this idea that we have to be twice as good to get half as far, it's been very easy for me to internalize this narrative that I have to achieve by any means necessary. And really, until very recently, this was so strongly embedded in my subconscious. Um, and Claudine Gay's saga is for me a reminder of the fact that the effort you put into achievement does not promise that you get that achievement, right? Your work is not always rewarded meritocratically. And in particular, when you are a woman of color, a Black woman in America, it is very likely that you will not be rewarded meritocratically for your effort. So for me, not only did I do the work to achieve, but I was willing to, and I did in many ways, sacrifice my personal and emotional well being in order to get the grades, in order to get the scores, in order to get in the schools, in order to see enough patients to make that money, in order to even, get this startup, get this Bite Wellness platform that's all about empowering Black women's wellness off the ground. There are ways in which I sacrifice my own well-being to do that. And the reminder is the trade-off is never worth it. It is always a losing battle if you sacrifice yourself.
Let's see.
And
So here's the thing too, and I'm sorry that I wanted to just bring to this. I think it's really important to clearly state that nobody that's a part of this conversation it approves of genocide, whether it's someone that's Israeli, whether they're Palestinian, whether they're African, African descent, Asian, Native Americans. There's no way that
no,
we approve
no,
of that. For me personally, again, I find it abhorrent, and it's much of what, in its own way, we've dealt with in its own forms here once we were brought here to this country. So I think, and so of course that's what they went after her about in the hearings initially, but then used the allegations of plagiarisms as a way to discredit her in order to get her out of the position because they want it. Because if there's only been 2 African Americans, then who of the other people in terms of have been president in Harvard's history, then who have the rest of them been?
yeah, she's only the
So,
second
so
woman and the first Black person to be
right,
president of Harvard
right.
ever.
So then the so that means that they were male, and I'm not aware of anyone that was not a white male that was the head of Harvard. And one of the things I also want to make sure though that we don't get lost in is
Mhm.
the fact that number one, and is this conversation is not just about high-powered women like Claudine Gay or like the three of us who, have achieved a level of and a standard of excellence in our own professions, because the truth of the matter is this applies, to, just your everyday working woman, your everyday woman who's at home raising children. Because when you raising kids, I always ask the question, are you working in the home or outside the home? Because to me, you're never not working. You're never not working. if you have a family. So I think again, I just want to make sure that women understand that this conversation, bless you, is not just about a small minority of high achieving women. This is about, again, the average everyday working woman, whether that's in the home or out of the home, and how a certain group of people, because of race and or gender, will never accept us as equals, and then the things that they do in order to keep us out or to get us out of the positions of power and profit that white men want for themselves. And so at this point, I just want Dr. Bridgette, how do you see this,
Yes.
the things we just talked about, relating to the your average working woman who's working to pay the bills and take care of her family, to contribute to carrying her for a family. Because as you well know, a large percentage is 60% or more of African-American families are headed by women. So how do you see what happened with Claudine Gay is relating to her?
Right. So, I mean, just to echo what Dr. Wu said, there was this idea of coming up with any excuse that they could come up with to discredit her. And the plagiarism excuse, the guy Ackerman, the main person, it came out later, a criticism of him that his wife 10 years ago, I think, was her dissertation denied or whatever. She may have lost a job because they actually proved she did plagiarize her dissertation. So, it is a double standard is the point. And just like Dr. Wu said, no matter how hard you work, no matter how many letters you have behind your name, no matter if you are, the head of the household and you are a working African-American woman, you have that sort of super S or W, if you want to go with the Wonder Woman, on your chest. And there are forces in this world, in America, who are designed to hold you back at every single level. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you are the president of Harvard versus the secretary taking care of, the administrative assistant for Harvard, for the Harvard president. You still can be discredited if someone feels that you have just talked too much, or you said too much, or you dress a certain way, or your hair looks a certain way, or you don't fit a certain agenda, or if you're too outspoken, or if they find that maybe you're too smart for them. A double standard is always applied, and African-American women heads are always on the chopping block. So we can find women of every socioeconomic level working super hard, taking care of everyone in their household. Like you said, sometimes the head of their households, but they have forces at their jobs who want to hold them back. So, Gay is at this pinnacle of the representation of a African American woman who's risen to a historic level where she is the second African American ever to be the president of Harvard, the first ever African American, the second only woman.
Second woman and first Black person ever.
First ever Black person, second ever woman. And that means, right, everyone else was a white male. Every single person was a white male. So not only women have a problem, Black women have a big problem. And as Dr. Wu said, the three women that they brought to congressional hearings were women. They didn't
Right.
bring any men, any male presidents. They sought out 3 powerful women. One just happens to be Black. So there is gender discrimination without question. So yes, women of every socioeconomic level, every ilk, have to work super hard. Black women even harder, because we do not get an extra shake. In fact, they're gunning for you. They're gunning for you. They're looking for you. They're waiting for you to mess up, and they're waiting for you to fail, because they do not like the fact that you have disrupted the fabric of America, is that Black people cannot achieve, and Black women are sister girls, or whatever they want to call us, and we can never achieve. So whenever we disrupt this stereotype that they have, their implicit bias is challenged, it goes against the grain for them. So they do whatever they can to get you. And that's at every level for Black women, unfortunately.
Right. And so I think it's before we go into the break, I just want to mention that, of course, Claudine Gay, while she stepped down, she resigned from being, president of Harvard. She remains on the faculty of Harvard. The other thing is, we've already talked about the president of University of Pennsylvania. She's also since resigned since part one of our conversation, and the president, who's female, of MIT, is now in the crosshairs as well. And so I think it's important also to keep in the context of what I talked about in part one, is that color and gender are very much a part of how they go about discriminating. But the real color that matters is the color of money, the color green. And so it's the color green in terms of representing resources. How do I get the resources for me and mine, and keep you away from getting the resources for you and yours? What do I have to do, and who do I have to do it to keep you from getting those resources? So with that, we'll go to break, and then we'll be right back. We're all on our own path, but many of us encounter the same apparent roadblocks, challenges, and suffering. Discover how your fear, doubts, and disbeliefs disconnect you from spirit, causing you to struggle and forgo your divine gifts and limitless possibilities. Heaven Abounds in You helps you to overcome your mind's roadblocks so you reconnect the spirit and flow. Discover you're always connected to your source. The source of your heart's desires is already within you, and your true identity is infinite potential with limitless possibilities. Heaven abounds in you. Hi, Dr. Balin A. Durr here for part 2 of my conversation about the protective illusion of the Black Superwoman complex, with my guests, Drs. Bridgette Arnett and Dr. Mawusi Arnett. So before we went to break, we were talking about obviously the former president of Harvard University, Claudine Gay, and then also the president of University of Pennsylvania. She's also resigned, and now the president, who's also female, of MIT, is in the crosshairs. But we also then we're talking about too how this is not just about women at the pinnacles of power and position, or women who are high achievers in their professions, like the three of us, but how this also applies to the average everyday working woman, because it's about when you're when you're an African American woman, you're not seen as equal, and so in the compensating, you're trying to be equal, but it doesn't matter because they still gonna come after you, right? And so, we also talked a lot about, mothers in terms of trying to achieve in this. But in part one, we also, Dr. Mawusi brought up that when she was in medical school, potentially one of the department, I don't know if it was the co-chair of internal medicine, basically said, we know they asked the question why, African Americans don't stay here for, once in terms of residency and or, clinical positions or attending physician positions after they graduate. And her comment was what, Dr. Mawusi? Remind us.
Yeah. And so she said, well, basically, we don't have a big enough pool of qualified Black applicants because we only have 2 buckets. You have the superstars way up here, acing everything, and all the other Black students from and Black trainees from our programs are affirmative action cases. The implication being that, and the improper implication, right, being that if they benefited from affirmative action, then they actually weren't qualified to be at the university and didn't merit moving forward, being promoted to resident at Penn or staying on as faculty at Penn. So the assumption is an inherently racist one because, of course, there aren't just 2 buckets of any type of student. And she wasn't saying this about the Asian students at Penn. She wasn't saying this about the white students at Penn. She wasn't saying this about the Latino students. She was saying specifically the Black students. They are either overachievers or they're, to paraphrase, worthless.
Or they don't deserve to be here. And so, let's call a thing, people. It's one of my favorites. Yana Van Zant would say, let's call a thing, people.
Call a thing a thing.
Which they're saying is that African Americans are inferior. You don't deserve to be here. You're not smart enough. We only let you in here because of the numbers. And then on the other token is, as as a white person, we're superior to you. We deserve to be here because we're smarter than you. And this is our spot that we only let you have. So the truth of the matter is, which has been proven scientifically, that there's, in terms of, there's no race is quote unquote inherently smarter than any other one. There's no one, therefore, that's more superior than either one of them when it comes to intellect and ability. And so saying that, continue to say that we're undeserving because of color and you're deserving because of color is it's just a lie, and it just promotes white supremacy. But it also promotes things that again that keep things stratified and keep certain folks poor, including a lot of white folks. Because as I said before, you got one person that has enough wealth that's equivalent to the bottom 50%. Hello. And if most of the people in this country are white, most of the people who, in terms of sheer numbers, that comprise the poor are white. Most of the people then on public assistance are white. So it's designed to promote that fallacy. And I think, which is the parts that we were going to get into, also is then talking about how that, affects how then, as an African American woman, then how do I see myself?
Yeah.
Do I have compassion for myself? Do I believe I deserve self-care? And what does that look like based upon, my own self-perception?
Right. And Dr. Ballin, if I can interject. Oh,
go ahead.
Mama
Go ahead,
Doc
Dr.
or Dr. Bridgette is speaking. I'll let you go, Mom.
Go ahead, daughter. Go ahead.
No, Dr.
Just
Bridgette,
like a mom putting her daughter first.
What were you gonna say? Because I know you have something enlightening to bring to this conversation. What were you going to say
Oh,
about
me.
that?
Oh, I thought you meant, oh, you know what?
Dr.
So
Bridget?
one thing you said, how do we get ourselves, how do we overcome this idea when everyone in the world is telling us that we're inferior or that we can't achieve because of the color of our skin? This is something I have to say. This is something my father ingrained in my brother and myself when we were very, very young, is to be educated about your history, not the history of when you were enslaved in this country, but the history at the beginning of civilization, when Africans were the purveyors of from science to math to religious ideas that are propagated today. Before the Greeks took the credit, there were Africans. So my father, every summer over break, we had to read books, go to the library, write reports. He had books that had been banned in the United States that we had to read and write reports. So it was very important for us to know our history. And that is how Black women, that's how Black people in America can achieve. Because you're right, the fallacy of racism hurts Blacks and whites. And the fallacy of racism and the propagation of white supremacy not just holds Blacks down, it holds whites down. And then they need someone to blame things on. Now, if everyone in the United States just looked at life not from a racist point of view, but a socioeconomic point of view, you would have the mass of the 99% would come together exactly and and work together as a group, and the 1% would be forced to share the wealth, and you would then expand your middle class. The whole point of racism is not just to hold Black people down, it is to hold poor people down. That means white, Latino, Asian. It is a socioeconomic problem under the guise of racism. So
Right,
the,
which
the
is
first
why Dr. Martin Luther's,
yeah, the first
I'm sorry, I'm
racist
saying, which
idea
is why
is
Dr.
about
Martin
being
Luther
late.
King, Martin Luther King's Poor People's Campaign was his shift in recognizing that, and the effort to get people to see that this is a larger problem,
Yes.
in this, as you said, a socioeconomic problem where race is a component of that. We absolutely are targeted. We absolutely are treated worse. We absolutely, in every indice, you see the consequences of that. So again, I never want people to think the saying that race is not an issue in this country when it absolutely is. It's just a
Right.
visible identifier that you're the other,
Right.
and I don't want you to have access to resources.
Yeah.
Right.
Just
Can
to
you imagine a
tie all.
poor white person? Yeah, sorry. I'm sorry. Could you imagine a poor white person saying that they're better than a Black person who's a professor at Harvard just because of the color
Well,
of their skin?
look,
Yeah.
here to tie
That's what they're
all
taught.
these
That's what they're taught.
Mhm.
to tie all these really great points together. I mean, first of all, right, question of what makes a better person. Is it our achievements? Is it our race? Is it other forms of prestige that are assigned in this country? I think that's kind of what we're getting at, right? And a conversation we had offline, Dr. Ballin, actually really helped elucidate this concept for me. Just the idea that even as we talk about Superwoman schema and this we sum it up, it's more than that, but we sum it up as a response to the realization that we need to be twice as good to get half as far in American society broadly. But that isn't a standalone problem. It exists under this umbrella of narratives that many different types of human beings tell themselves, either because we're taught them culturally or because we develop them personally as an individual response to some sort of trauma or stressor and an attempt to try to control our outcomes, that narrative undervalues our well-being and then outsources our value, right? Projects our value as a human being onto something else and says, I'm a good person, I'm a special person and a valuable person because I'm a doctor, because I have this degree. I'm a special person because, and it's not just achievement, right? So we're talking about how this applies to broadly to every Black woman out there, even those who maybe don't work outside the home. But you helped me understand, Dr. Ballin, that it is a very similar strain to the narrative that a lot of us also tell ourselves, that we are a good person or a special person and a proper woman if we can serve other people appropriately, right? Mm-hmm. If we can be a good caregiver to our children, to our parents, to our friends, to whomever. And the way the narrative goes is, my value lies in the things that I do for others, the things that I achieve, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. And not intrinsically. And as long as we attach what matters most to it, the essence of who we are, to all of these external factors, we are going to be willing to sacrifice ourselves for or in the pursuit of those external factors. So,
right, because the problem is two things. Number one, anytime you define your identity and your worth on something that's external to your being, it's everything in the physical is temporary. So it rises and it falls, it comes and it goes. So therefore, I tell people, that's like, attaching your happiness and your worth to a car bumper. You're gonna get dragged down the street because it's like I said, it's here, it's not, it's gone, right? So it's up, it's down, and so it's important that we have to reach a place where we ask ourselves, am I going to allow myself to be defined and confined by others? Again, am I going to allow myself to be defined and confined by others? And, also as both as a spiritual person, do I recognize or see that I'm a sacred being? Just like if I come from the creator, as I tell, I'm in the universe is in me, right? So how is it that a child of the universe made of stardust? Because the atoms in our bodies come from exploding stars. The iron in our blood comes from exploding stars. The calcium in our bones comes from exploding stars. How is it that a child of the universe made of stardust, I'm inadequate? How is it that it's impossible? How is it that my liver is better than my skin? Well, no, it's not, because they serve different functions. And without my skin, I'm going to die because I'm going to get an infection. It's also holding things together. So we have to understand, we also, in that comparing ourselves to others, what I'm doing is I'm missing out on who I am and what my purpose is. And then doing that to the best of my ability, because I'm comparing myself to you or somebody else, going, I can't do that. But I'm not designed to do that. And the whole suffers when I don't do what I'm here to do, when I don't fulfill my purpose, when I don't recognize, as I like to say, my own unique wonderfulness. And so if I keep seeking after your approval, and you're never going to give it to me because you don't see me as worthy, or even sometimes as a human being, because of my color, I'm wasting my precious life force and energy trying to get you to see something and value something that you're never going to be able to see and value, right? So how do we, bring that then back to,
right.
what we're talking about in terms of health and well-being, then I've got to be willing to, as my dear friend and spiritual teacher, I call him Master Yoda, lovingly call him Master Yoda, said we need to spend some time looking at the ceiling, asking life's big questions. Who am I? Why am I here? Not continuing to get that answer from somebody else who didn't create me. So how you gonna tell me who I am and what worth I have when you didn't create me and make me? And and your perception is just distorted and twisted and sideways, and you belong up in Arkham. Talk about the third person who don't get it. You don't get it. So why am I like talking to you anyway? Why am I listening to? Why am I believing you? Right? Dr. Bridgette, Miss, what do y'all think about that?
Yeah.
No, go ahead, Dr. Bridgette. Go ahead.
No, I totally agree. You're right. And so there's a level of autonomy and self-awareness, self-love and understanding that you're propagating, that you're saying, this is how racism, and just being from a spiritual point of view, knowing that God made us, knowing that we have certain worth, knowing that we have worked hard to get to our current level of success, whatever that is, and that we have to be proud of ourselves and move forward from there.
But I think, again, that requires a recognition that, again, if I'm the person who is, driving the bus, right? Or if I'm the cafeteria lady, or if I'm working in a daycare center, or I'm working at a fast food restaurant as a cashier, then I still have value and worth. Not because, stop tying that to what I do. Stop tying that to my results, because I'm in my words, either depending upon your wisdom tradition or your faiths and beliefs, you're either a spiritual being or a physical being or human being, but you're not a human doing. You're not a spiritual doing, right? You are a being. So your worth, as you said, is intrinsic to your being, not to your doing and not to your results, right? So it doesn't matter the work you do. It doesn't matter the level to which you achieve. It doesn't matter if it's quote excellence, if you twice as good or not. You have inherent worth because you exist.
Say it again, Dr. Ballin. Somebody else needs to hear that.
Okay, I said that we have to recognize that, regard depending upon our wisdom tradition or our faith and beliefs, that we are either spiritual beings and not spiritual doings, or human beings and not human doings, and that our worth therefore is based upon who I am as a being. That's inherent and intrinsic to who I am as a being. It never had anything to do with what I do or my results. And so the other thing I like to remind people in that regard, then, it doesn't have to do with how well you do something, how excellent it is, or how mediocre it is. Just your worth has everything, is based upon the fact that you exist.
Yeah. I mean, look, that's so powerful. And we know, I don't know about you, but as wonderful as my parents are, as well as they taught us, I had, messaging from the world seep into my brain, to my understanding as I went through life, right? Becoming a young adult and understanding just how much these systems in particular will project our value across these signs of prestige. The simpler way of saying it is just, well, I don't know if this is simpler or not, but what you pointed out, the fact that each of us has intrinsic value, there's nothing else we have to do to get there to be a valuable human being. That is a fact that is contradicted in every single system of oppression, whether we're talking about classism or racism or homophobia or
Why?
any of it.
Because they do that because it's a way of keeping you in line and in a
Yeah,
box in order to meet their needs.
right.
You know, so we need to recognize, you know, what it is and why it is.
Yeah.
It's designed to have you be who people want you to be. And you know, another way I try to get people to think about something is when people talk about success or failure. And I have this thing where we always successful. Why? Because every time you take an action, you create a result. So you always successful. It's just a lot of time you successfully create some issue you don't want.
Mm-hmm. But you learn from it.
Right.
Even
Right.
then, you
Well,
learn
but did you
something.
learn from it? That's another question. But the counter to that though
Right.
is that failure is always a result. It's never a person. And so we have to sit
Mhm.
back and think about
Yes.
where do I get my thoughts from and my beliefs from, and that it's a choice for me to believe that, it's a choice for me not to. As I like to say, you know, is in terms of people's negative opinions and things like you know, people can offer you cocaine. It's up to you to say thank you or no thank you, right? So I was gonna say
Right.
we lost Dr. Bridgette, and so I'm glad she's back. But one of the things I want to get into, because we're gonna have to do a part 3 as but I want to get into, we've talked about how that sense of self is we have to define that for ourselves. But again, if you lack compassion, if you don't like you, okay, then you don't value you, and then you don't have self-compassion, and you don't therefore take care of you, and therefore you end up with illness, or you end up with less than optimal health. So I'd like for us to at
Here's
least get into that before in this last minute or so. And then of course we're gonna have to come on back for part 3. Dr. Bridgette.
Yes. So if I can make sure my Wi-Fi doesn't go out again while I'm in the middle of speaking. The
you on a
importance of an
roll
Ethernet
too.
connection, right? I know, right?
So what we got?
So yes, right.
Where we
So
gonna
you're
say
right. So that self-determination, that loving yourself and being comfortable with yourself is important. And we as Black women have to understand how we get to that point. Doesn't matter what S or W's on your chest. If you're not happy with who you are and where you are and whose you are, then you cannot take care of other people. You have got to take care of yourself. From going to the doctor, getting your mammograms, getting your screenings, getting vaccinations so that you don't become ill and make other people ill, or that you're taken out of commission, taking your blood pressure meds when you've been diagnosed, taking your vitamin D when you've been diagnosed with deficiencies. You know, self-care is getting up, grooming, brushing your teeth, washing your face, saying your prayers, being thankful.
So
From the
Dr.
beginning.
Mawusi, so Dr. Mawusi, just really quickly, I know we're gonna get into this some more, but I also know, obviously, you know, getting enough sleep, right? Because that's important to a number of
Yeah.
things in our health, right? If you can't sleep,
Yeah.
if you're not well rested, it's almost impossible to lose weight, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, look, I
Yes.
tend to talk to patients and also members of the Bite Wellness community about the wellness superpowers that we have, at least 7, right? But You can think of them in terms of EMS, so emergency medical services. Like when you get in trouble, who do you call? If you have to call 911, who are you calling? E for eating well. We can get into what that means, but primarily whole foods, lots and lots of plants. M for moving very regularly, like as much as possible, including non-exercise movement.
Mhm.
And then a bunch of S's. There's sleeping well, like you said, Dr. Ballin. There's stress management, so de-stressing. There is strategic substance use.
And then obviously they can reach you at ByteWell, BYTE, wellness, WELLNESS.com. And Dr. Bridgette, you're at Hyde Park. What's
Neurology.com.
Hyde Park Neurology.
HydeParkNeurology.com. Okay. So thank you so much, ladies, for joining us. Again, I'm your host, Dr. Ballin A. Durr, awakening and empowering you to live out your infinite potential, to live life in the sweet spot. See you next week. Thank you for joining us today in the sweet spot. Share, follow, and like us on social media. To learn more, please visit ballinadurmd.com, spelled BALINADURRMD.com. Join us next week, and remember, when you heal your mind, all things are possible.